All right. So, with our next interview, I'm going to turn it over to someone who's not a stranger to the podcast, our returning podcast guest and also returning guest host. And that's Jaimie Engle from Depaul University. Jaimie, how are you?
Hey, Matt, doing great. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming back on the podcast. This one's going to be another exciting interview. And I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce your guest and have a great time.
All right. Thanks as always, Matt. Appreciate it. Okay, folks. Well, today I have the pleasure of interviewing my dear Nakata and just life friend, Becky Ryan. Becky is the undergraduate program coordinator for the Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's been active in Nakata since 1996, including presenting numerous times at the national conference in concurrent sessions and pre-conference workshops. She has served as regional representative for Nakata, faculty for summer institutes, chair for a Nakata regional and a Wakata state conference, president of Wisconsin Academic Advising Association, Wisconsin state liaison to Nakata, currently in her second term, did that a few years back, and we'll get to that. And she has also served on Nakata's Professional Development and Awards Committee. Becky has written for the New Advisor Guidebook and Academic Advising Today. Her favorite topics are advisee management, advisor training, advising curriculums, collaborative relationships, undecided students, integrating academic and career advising, and the value of liberal arts. Becky, welcome to the podcast. How you doing up in Wisconsin?
Thank you, Jaimie. It is a gorgeous day up here in Wisconsin. One of like 20 days out of the year where it's legit gorgeous. And let me just say, I am super honored to be joining you today. It's really a big deal for me to be joining not only such a fabulous up and coming professional, but somebody I really do consider to be a friend.
And you could be talking about me or Matt in that. So
that's also true. That is so true.
But thank you so much. No, we're excited to have you. Well, I'd love to get started with something that I don't even know how much you and I as friends have discussed. How did you get into advising? Tell us your journey, please.
Well, that's a great question. Where to start, right? So I was born back in, okay, no, I'm kidding on that. I got into advising pretty much right away in my career, and I was lucky enough to have paid attention to some of the important cues in my life. I'll just put out there, I'm a first generation college student. I knew early on that I would absolutely go to college. I came from a family that didn't necessarily have lots of money to throw around because I was one of 7 children. And so when I went to college, I ended up being the first one in my family to do so and paid pretty much 95% of that college degree out of my pocket. So, that said, it did take me some time. And I tell my students all the time, doesn't matter how long it takes you, as long as you do it. Took me 7 years. And in my experience, that was just right for me. And along those journeys of college courses and trying to figure out what I was going to do, I always knew that I was kind of a people person. And without much thought at all, I decided to be a psychology major. And like many students in the undergraduate experience, I decided psychology. And right away, I had some assumptions about what that meant for me. And of course, that meant that I was going to be a counselor of some sort. But at the time, I was working and paying my way through college, and I was able to do so by way of my awesome bartending job. Bartending helped me get not only my undergraduate degree, but also my master's degree. And I was making pretty good money as a bartender. So I got about 3 semesters away from graduating. And I went down to our careers office. Literally in those days, it was a binder, for those of you who get that reference. And I was paging through the binder of what I was going to do with my psychology major and what kind of counseling jobs, and immediately deflated when I saw that all the jobs that I thought I could apply for paid quite a bit less than my current job as a bartender. And I went through a moment of, oh my God, I've put all this work in for all this time, and I'm going to have to stay a bartender. Thankfully, my curiosity got the best of me, and I paged a little forward into that binder, and I started seeing all kinds of really cool jobs that I'd never even thought of before, and that I was absolutely in line to apply for. And that got me thinking, all right, so I can do a whole range of things. And the next thing I did was I sat down and did some career exercises. And one of the things that kept showing up in my top 3 list was high school guidance counselor. And I was like, oh, I could totally do that. I could totally be a high school guidance counselor. So thankfully, again, the person I was working with at UW Parkside at the time said, you know what, Becky, that's a great idea. But the next step is to actually go check that out and investigate it a little further. So she helped me set up a volunteer experience where I went and actually worked with my former high school guidance counselor at Case High School in Racine, Wisconsin, a high school counselor who I loved and got along with very well. And I started that volunteer experience, and it didn't take me long to realize that that little like 20-minute slot that I had with her once a semester was not really very representative of the job overall. And when I finished that 3-month experience, no offense to the high school guidance counselors out there, but for me, I was like, there's no way I want to do that. That's just not my gig. But I still credit it as one of the most important experiences that I had, because it allowed me a chance to think about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. And frankly, what I liked about it was I got excited when students came in and talked about their future and what they could do and how they were going to go to college or go on for this additional education in some way, and had big dreams for the life. I loved those students. The students I didn't like were the ones that were like, I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to be here anymore. That's, for me, that was frustrating. And I figured out that if I worked in a university setting, that I would skim all those students out, and I would be working with students who've already made the decision to do something exciting with their life. So from that point, I enrolled in the master's program at UW-Whitewater, guidance and counseling with an emphasis in higher education. And frankly, the rest is history. Here I am.
Beautifully said. Now I know the full story. Yeah, I'm sure that's, not an uncommon sentiment. Tried the guidance counselor thing and decided I want to work with college students. I did a bit of substitute teaching while I was finishing my master's. And I was like, yep, cannot wait to work with students that are here by choice and ideally passionate about what they're studying, though we know that's not always the case. So I feel that's a good transition into my next question, which is, what has been your favorite thing about the advising profession and or Nakata involvement?
So for me, once I made the decision to go to graduate school, get a master's degree, I started working once again at UW Parkside, and they graciously took me back, and I worked in sort of a split mode of being an academic advisor and being a career advisor. And it didn't take me long to figure out that they were virtually the same job with different titles and different nomenclatures, perhaps. And I decided the best way to get students in early is to call yourself an academic advisor, but to do career advising with those students. And it was this sort of aha moment that I had that, and I was guilty of it too. I did not go and see a career advisor until I had like a year to go. And at that point, I sort of regretted, like, there was so much I could have done, so much more I could have known as a first generation college student, and many others, frankly, but I did not know what I did not know. And once I started piecing that together, I started thinking, I'm going to be an academic advisor, but I'm going to do career advising. I'm going to start those conversations early on. It's not going to be just about what you should take, but why you might take that, and how can we connect that to bigger goals in your life. So what I have always loved about advising is the opportunity to have really meaningful conversations with students about who they are, how they got there, and where they might go, and try to break down some of those stereotypes about the same ones I had. I'm a psych major, I guess I got to be a counselor, right? It couldn't be more wrong. It's one of the reasons I love talking about the value of liberal arts, because it's not about the name of your major, really, ever. It's really about the name of your degree. And in my case, it was a liberal arts degree. And once I understood that I had way more options than I had originally thought. And so as I was doing my master's degree and doing these experiential things, I started piecing these things together that just made sense to me. And I decided that I wanted to be the advisor I never had, the advisor that I could have used, especially as a first generation person, and not, I had nobody literally to tell me what I didn't know, making a lot of the same mistakes and a lot of the same stumbles that lots of students have. And I wanted to save students that time and money. Frankly, education is expensive. So one of the things I love best about advising is, of course, working with the students. But even a little more than working with the students, I love training and teaching other advisors about how to think differently, how to do their work, how to bring in new perspectives, how to use stories and metaphors and other ways to think about creating these messages for students. Because, maybe had I had somebody like me as an advisor, maybe it wouldn't have taken me 7 years. Maybe I would have known about the opportunity to study abroad. Maybe I would have known about things that would have moved me down the path a little quicker, right? So the only regrets I have is, now that I have insight, maybe I could have done it a little quicker. Maybe I could have saved a little money on it. But what I really love is being involved in the community of advising, not only for the benefit of students, but for the benefit of each other.
I totally get that. Definitely enjoy connecting and getting other advisors engaged. And yet again, we have a great transition into my next question, or maybe statement, which is, you mentored our good friend, a very important person in the association, JP Villavicencio from University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Tell us about your time advising, mentoring JP, and sort of, that growth you've seen from from all that time ago.
Well, it takes a village, right? And I've also had my own mentors, namely George Steele, Don Woolston, among others. And so when I was, back in the day, back when JP was, an undergraduate, he worked for my office as a peer advisor. And fate saw to it that JP and I worked together very often in the Lakeshore Residence Hall office. And so JP would sit there while I would do my advising, and then I would draw JP into the conversation. And we really had, a really great working relationship together. And it was quite a moment for me when JP decided that he wanted to go on and pursue the field of academic advising. And I felt like maybe I had a little bit of a role to play in that. I have never been more proud than what JP has been able to achieve. I am one of his biggest cheerleaders now, and he's, far more advanced and far more along the path of advising administration than I could have ever hoped to be. But we still have a very good relationship, and I think he is going to be an outstanding leader for the organization, for advising and for Nakata.
I completely agree with you. I think it was in Cincinnati that I realized for the first time that JP is a few months younger than me. And I was shocked because I look up to JP so much. And I should have said this at the beginning, but of course, JP is a former podcast guest. He's been on at least one of our episodes. And also we have JP to thank for introducing Becky and I. He co-chaired what would have been the 2020 Region 5 conference in Milwaukee that was unfortunately canceled 2 weeks prior. Becky and I, along with some other wonderful people, were on that conference planning committee. And then we got to remain on the planning committee to do it virtually in 2021 with Region 3. So big shout outs to JP all around.
Shout outs to JP.
That's right.
We heart JP.
We heart JP. All right. Well, now back to your Nakata, your sort of passion for being involved in the community. Some podcast listeners, that have been involved maybe for a little longer, may remember and recognize your name from some of those big presentations that you used to do back in the day with your colleague Don. And I think there were two of them. Let's first talk about the advisors who talk too much. I don't think that was the title, but tell us about that, how that came about. What's the idea there?
Well, actually, I would like to start at the beginning. And it was actually in 1998, Nakata was in San Diego, and my colleague Don and I were sitting in a lounge watching the Packer game, and I'm pretty sure it was the Viking Packer game. And it was not too pretty for our beloved Packers, that's for sure. So we were all getting a little grumpy. And my friend Don, who is now retired, leaned over to me and he said, you know what? I think we should do a presentation next year. And we're going to call it The 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective Advisors. And it was really sort of a tongue-in-cheek comment. And I was like, I love that idea so much. And Don then went and took a 6-month sabbatical to South Africa. And so I was left behind here in Wisconsin, put together this proposal and abstract. And lo and behold, we got the 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective Advisors approved for presentation in 1999 in Denver. And it was a big hit. I think the title alone drew a lot of advisors in. But what was the bigger hit of it was that Don and I were, not unlike you and I, Jaimie, we were a little bit of a comedy team together. And so we decided we would role play each of these habits of the advisors. And I can still remember how much laughter was in the room that day. People cracking up. There were people sitting in the aisleway. They were sitting behind us. The room was crammed full. And we had them all cracking up so hard. We had such a good time that we decided, well, we're going to do that again. That was a lot of fun. So the following year we did training to avoid the 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective Advisors, followed by the next year, understanding the advisor in you, a key to avoiding the 7 Habits of Highly Ineffective Advisors. And then we thought maybe we've really, killed the hell out of that topic. So we started venturing out, and it was always important to us to do things that we thought were pertinent, practical, and had an air of humor about it, right? If you can't poke fun at yourself, there's some problem involved. So the one that you're particularly talking about was by far, hands down, my favorite conference session title of them all. And I wish I had it in writing, but I'll say it slowly. That title was called On and On, Anon, a 10-step program for advisors who talk too much. And yes, it was just as funny as the title. And the thing is, people see themselves in this material, right? And we would take things really to the obscure extremes so that nobody was all the way there, but we all saw a little bit of ourselves in these caricatures that we were portraying. And Don and I had a very successful 11 years straight run on these concurrent sessions that we did. And each year getting more and more popular. And, I can remember the first year in 1999 having a regular old sized concurrent session room to year 11 when they put us in a room that sat like 400 people, because every year we would get more and more people to come, and we were having a lot of fun. And that 11th, actually the 10th session was Stephen Covey had just come out with his 8th habit. So of course we were like, well, who would we be if we didn't have the 8th advising habit, which was called Oblivion. And we had the 5 dark shadows of Oblivion, and it was also very funny. The 11th year was really just a recap of all of our presentations ever, and that we ended with a little, believe it or not, we ended that with a little dance routine at the end of that. But also along the way, we did easily 4 or 5 pre-conference sessions. Those were a little bit more serious in nature, often having a lot of self-reflection involved in those pre-conference sessions, writing chapters for the monographs, and being involved in summer institutes was a lot of fun. And when you do a good conference presentation, you really do feel the generosity of the membership saying to you, I needed that really bad. At one time I got a evaluation that I still have hanging on my wall in my office that the person wrote on the bottom of it, this session alone was worth the cost of attending this conference, which I paid for out of my own pocket. Thank you very much. And I thought, if I never get any good evaluations after that, that one just made my lifetime. It was the most heartfelt, special evaluation that we had received. But so we do these presentations. We'd have not only fun putting them together, but fun delivering them, and it showed. And it's part of my time with Nakata that I miss, frankly, because it's sort of behind us now. But get involved and have fun. You don't have to be serious when you give those presentations. In fact, if anything we learned was the more ridiculous we would get in acting these things out. When we did the 7 Habits, Don played the great Karnak for you older people who are listening. I called it the all-knowing oracle, and we put a towel on his head so that he looked like a fortune teller, and people love that, right? So it just goes to show you that learning is more fun when it's fun.
What a sentence to wrap that up with. That was beautiful. And fortunately, I do know Johnny Carson, but I think I'm right on the cusp, and I think I can thank my parents for that. Also infomercials. Would you, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but would you run through maybe some of those ineffective habits, or maybe give us your favorite ones? Or
Oh, you are putting me on the spot. There are 7 of them.
I know.
Well, there was the all-knowing oracle. That one had to do with thinking what the student's going to ask you before they even ask you the question. And so when we role played that one, I played the student, and Don had the towel on his head, and I would say, hey, so my name's Becky, and I just went, and Don would say, hold on, a message is coming in, and he would have a card to his head, and he'd be like, the ride board is located outside of every residence hall. And I'd say, I was actually going to ask you about what courses I could take for my ethnic studies, right? So that was a pretty funny one. There was another one, I want to say it was called, had to do with being distracted. So once again, I played the student in that particular role play, and I would be like, so I'm having a little trouble with my roommate, and then the phone would ring, and Don would be like, hold on. Yeah, Nancy? Oh yeah, can you tell the car, I got the oil change at noon. Okay, thank you for that. All right. So what were you saying? And then I would say, well, I'm having a little trouble with my roommate. Hold on, Nancy, I almost forgot. Can you? So, the distracted advisor. We also had one that was called the human file cabinet, where we all have this knowledge in our head, but maybe it never gets updated, just like that stuff in your file cabinet. And so, when we role play that one, it would be like, so I was looking at the requirements for the Spanish major, and then Don would say, oh yeah, you got to do this, and this. And I'm like, well, that's not what it says on their website, right? Oh, did they change their requirements and I wasn't told that, right? So there are 7 of those, and they're all like that. I have joked, Jaimie knows I have joked about this with her, that maybe we should recap 7 Habits and try to bring that back into rotation, just because it's so fun to do, and just a lot of good fun reminders about how not to get stuck in a rut with your advising role.
Maybe we can, let's bring it back to life for Orlando next year, maybe.
I think
Orlando's next year. Yeah.
I think we did one of them. I think number 2 happened in Orlando. I'm not positive about that timing, but I think it's on. Let me just add, we would get these ideas for these presentations just based on what was happening around us. And when we came up with the idea for on and on and on, it was because we were actually at a annual conference. I'm pretty sure it was in Cincinnati. And Don was on his way to the hotel from the airport. And the taxi driver said to Don, like, so who are all these people that are in town? Like, what do you guys all do? And Don said, well, we're academic advisors from all over the United States. And the taxi driver said, well, you sure do all like to talk a lot, right? So we cracked up so hard at that. We're like, that's a session. I mean, we got to the point where every time we'd have a conversation, we'd be like, that's a session, right? So, session ideas are all around you at any given point in time.
That's so good. And I know you've told me that story, and I always forget that led to then this incredible presentation.
Even with my background as a bartender, I've always toyed with the idea of doing a presentation that would be like advising as bartending, and we would role play it, and somebody would come in and I'd be the bartender. I'd be like, what do you have? Oh, you want the usual again? Okay, let's talk about that.
All right, ideas. We'll chat after the interview.
I'm always open to it.
That's right. Well, and you have been involved, like you said, with the association for a little while, particularly within our beloved Region 5. I was interested to hear about, I know, was it during your chair term or before your chair term that you chaired that Madison conference in the early 2000s that, at least up until then, was one of the most successful Nakata conferences. Tell us about that.
It was 2003. And it was the first year, I'm pretty sure about this anyways, it was the first year that Nakata had decided to try a joint conference. So we were paired with our neighbors to the west. I think it's Region 4, but I don't want to make any promises on that. It's Region 4. But so we had to do some planning, and we were going to bring them in, and the numbers of people that came to that conference that year broke all the records. There was huge attendance from both sides, more than what each would have gotten on their own. And we held it at the beautiful Monona Terrace in Madison, which was a fairly new building at the time, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, but never built by him in his lifetime. And then Madison came back around and built that in the late 90s, I believe, is when it was completed. And we welcomed people to Madison and to the Monona Terrace and had just an amazing conference that had Babcock ice cream and trolley rides and all kinds of fun and lots and lots of attendees. I mean, that record has been surpassed now, but it was something we held in very high regard. And so that was in March of 2003. And then in October of 2003, I officially assumed my position as the Region 5 chair, following in George Steele's footsteps, and continued to make some waves once I was in that role, including pushing for, really fighting for regional awards at that time. Our region is big, as you know, and we have a very dedicated and passionate group of members that are here, and we were making some money with those conferences. And frankly, George and I felt like we wanted to give that back. And so we wanted to create these awards. There was a little concern by the national office because they had awards and how would that work together? But we said we will work it out, and there's no such thing as too many awards. And now it's amazing to me that I'm pretty sure every region now has an awards, whatever you would call it, awards program. And I feel like Region 5 really led the way on that, namely just me taking the helm from George and continuing to push that forward. So I really feel proud of our region. I feel like our region has been a trendsetter in many ways and for many things, including regional awards and affiliate organizations, because we were also pushing very hard at that time to make sure that each of our states and our province of Ontario would have a state level or province level organization. So in Wisconsin, we had Wakata. In my time as region chair, Miyakata came on board. OHA was around for a while. Illicata was around by then. And we really wanted to amp that up and continue that collaboration because, and really a lot of this always goes back to my being a first generation college student, because it's about access and at what level can you access things. And not everybody can travel to national conferences. State level conferences can provide really awesome opportunities as well. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think you enter into professional development at whatever level suits your comfort and your pocketbook, right? So I think the awards and the organizations, George and I were on the same page that we wanted to really create as much accessibility to advising professional development as we possibly could.
Well, and certainly the region continues to thank you both for that. Definitely. I, as the current Region 5 chair, could not be more proud of all the accomplishments before you two, since you two. You laid a very solid foundation that kind of made it easy for me to come into the role and know that there's already such a robust, awards program and everything. And Region 5 is excited to be adding some new awards. Shout out to our awards chair, Rachel Pulowski, for doing a lot of work on that sort of thing.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yes. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Giving back to the membership. That's what we're gonna try to keep doing. So, well, with that, Becky, I want to thank you for your time today. Is there anything else you wanted to say to the listeners?
Are you giving me a microphone right now? That's very dangerous.
Unstructured.
I mean, I have no, special words of wisdom. I will say, as a person who really found her way in advising, coming from, where I came from, a first generation student, I literally had no advising when I was an undergraduate. And when I got involved, I just chose to get involved, right? There's no barriers to that. Like, sometimes I think it's a big, scary step for people to be like, I would have people ask me, like, how do you get to do all this fun stuff? And I would say, I just volunteer to do the fun stuff, right? I also am a believer that it never hurts to ask. I ask for a lot of stuff and I get a lot of yeses, right? But you will never get a yes if you don't ask. You might get some no's, who cares? Boo-hoo, get a no, right? But you're never gonna get a yes if you don't ask. You're never gonna get things handed to you if you don't choose to get involved. So, it has made my professional life really special to be a part of Nakata, to have been a part of them for so very long, to have seen many changes in the organization. It really does. Sounds cliche, but it really does feel like family to me. Some of my closest friends I have met through Nakata, including Georgia Pegsteel, Eric White, among numerous others, including you as well, Jaimie. And, it's me saying to JP, if you really want to be in advising, get involved in Nakata. And he took that advice wholeheartedly. It really will change your world, change your life. So I guess I would just leave everybody listening to the podcast. Like, if you're not involved already, why not do it? It's fun. And there are so many different ways to get involved. You don't have to necessarily stand in front of a group and talk. I like that, but I understand not everybody likes that. But you can write something, you can volunteer, you can organize something, you can lead a book club. There's so many ways to just participate in the community of advising that will make your jobs back at your individual institutions that much better.
Well, you heard it here, folks. I couldn't say it much better. Becky, if anybody wants to get in touch with you about your experiences or any questions they might have for you, what would be a good way to reach you?
They can email me at rjryan@wisc.edu. I welcome anybody to contact me.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, my friend Becky Ryan from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.